The fog-bound Colossus. Some creatures were never lost, they were hidden. Part 1. The Discovery, Chapter 1. The train through the fog. The mist curled like living tendrils around the trees, obscuring the landscape beyond the train window. Dr. Elias Grant pressed his forehead against the cold glass, his breath fogging its surface. He had long since given up on the book in his lap. The words blurred into meaningless shapes as his mind wandered. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was hypnotic, a steady drumbeat to his thoughts, until something shifted in the fog. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage of shadow and mist. But the shape moved, deliberate, colossal. His pulse spiked. He sat up, heart hammering, eyes straining against the thick, swirling mist outside. The shape loomed, a massive form, taller than the trees, its outline shifting but unmistakably real. A thick tail swept through the undergrowth, scattering mist in its wake. The beast turned its head, and, for the briefest moment, two golden eyes shone through the veil of fog. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the mist swallowed it whole. Elias shot to his feet. The train car swayed with the motion, but he barely noticed. He scanned the trees as they whipped past, but there was nothing now, only mist and memory. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. The elderly woman sitting across from him gave him a puzzled glance. "Are you all right, dear?" Elias barely heard her. His mind was still reeling. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Yet, in his 30 years of studying paleontology, he had never seen anything move like that. Anything except the reconstructions in museums, the simulations in documentaries, the carefully calculated approximations of what once was. But this wasn't a simulation. This was real. The train lurched, slowing as it neared the next station, a small, near-forgotten town nestled at the edge of the vast, uncharted wilderness. Elias hesitated. He had planned to continue straight to the city, to his failing research position, his dwindling funding, his lectures to half-empty halls. But something primal, something urgent gripped him. He needed to see it again. With a suddenness that surprised even himself, Elias grabbed his bag and rushed toward the exit. The train hissed to a stop, and the doors groaned open. The moment his feet touched the platform, he knew there was no turning back. The station was nearly deserted. A single ticket vendor sat in a wooden booth, half asleep. Beyond the platform, a dirt path led into the forest. The same forest where he had seen... No, he wouldn't allow himself to call it that. Not yet. The air was thick with moisture, the scent of wet earth and pine sharp in his nostrils. Fog coiled around the trees like ghosts, reluctant to let go. Elias adjusted the strap of his bag and took his first step toward the unknown. As he walked, memories of his childhood flooded back. Memories of why he had chosen this path in the first place. It wasn't the sterile halls of academia, the endless debates with colleagues over fossil evidence and evolutionary trajectories. It was the mystery, the wonder. A chance, however slim, to glimpse something that defied understanding. And here he was, walking straight into it. The deeper he ventured into the forest, the quieter it became. The usual chorus of birdsong had vanished. No rustling leaves, no distant hum of insects. Just silence, thick, expectant. Then a sound. Not a bird, not the wind. Something heavy, shifting just beyond the trees. Elias froze. A shadow moved through the fog. It wasn't an illusion. His breath hitched as the shape took form, stepping out of the mist with slow, deliberate grace. It was massive, its skin dark and ridged like weathered stone. Muscles rippled beneath its hide. It moved with an intelligence that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. Tyrannosaurus Rex. Not a skeleton in a museum, not a rendering in a textbook. A living, breathing creature. Elias felt his knees weaken, the rational part of his mind screaming that this wasn't possible. Yet the evidence stood before him, exhaling slow, misty breaths into the cold air. Then, to his utter astonishment, the creature lowered its head, just slightly, just enough for Elias to know it was looking at him. Not as prey, Not as a predator, as something else entirely. Time stretched thin. Elias dared not move. The air between them was charged, as if the universe itself held its breath. Then, in a motion so fluid it seemed unreal, the beast turned and disappeared back into the fog. Elias remained frozen, his mind racing. He should be running, screaming, calling the authorities. But no one would believe him. Hell, he barely believed himself. But he had seen it, and now there was no going back. Elias adjusted his bag and followed the footprints vanishing into the mist. Chapter 2. The decision to follow. The train pulled away with a low groan, its iron frame swallowed by the thickening fog. Elias stood on the empty platform, gripping the strap of his bag, feeling the weight of his decision settle into his bones. The town, if it could even be called that, was little more than a handful of buildings tucked against the edge of the wilderness. The station itself was an afterthought, a wooden shelter with peeling paint, a rusted bench, and a single lantern flickering dimly against the encroaching mist. No one had gotten off with him. No one had been waiting. The ticket vendor, an older man with a face lined like old parchment, glanced up from behind the glass. His gaze lingered on Elias, searching, measuring. "You're not from around here," the vendor said, his voice rough with years of disuse. Elias hesitated. "No, just passing through," the vendor snorted. "No one just passes through here." Elias nodded absently, his mind already fixed on the path leading into the trees. The same path where the impossible had taken form. A voice in his head, the rational, methodical scientist, urged him to stop, to turn back, to pretend he had never seen the shape in the mist. But another voice, deeper, older, whispered something else. "Go!" The need to know, to verify what he had seen, pulled him forward. He had spent his life chasing ghosts of the past, bones in the dirt, fossils locked in stone, remnants of a world that no longer existed. But what if it did exist? What if history had not been erased, but merely hidden? He took a deep breath and stepped off the platform. The dirt road stretched ahead, vanishing into the thick trees. The mist curled around his ankles as he walked, the scent of damp earth and pine filling his lungs. The silence was absolute, pressing against him like a held breath. The trees loomed taller as he went deeper, ancient, untouched. They whispered in the wind, their branches shifting like unseen hands reaching through the fog. And then, just beyond the first bend, he saw it. A footprint. Large. Deep. The kind of print no living creature should have left. Elias knelt beside it, his fingers hovering over the impression in the damp earth. The shape was unmistakable, 3 taloned toes, a long arch, the weight distribution suggesting a bipedal stance. A theropod. His breath came faster. He had studied fossilized tracks before, had reconstructed ancient movements from long-dead prints. But this was fresh. The edges were crisp, the soil still settling where the weight had pressed down. His mind rebelled against the truth, but the truth did not care. A rustling sound echoed from deeper in the trees. Low, steady, something moving. Elias swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to leave, to run back to the station, to board the next train, to forget this place and bury what he had seen. But he couldn't. His hands clenched into fists. He had spent too many years trapped behind lecture halls, fighting for grants, arguing with peers over theories that never led to anything but dead ends. He had spent his life searching for proof of a lost world. And now the lost world had found him. The rustling grew louder. A shadow flickered through the mist. Elias stood, squared his shoulders, and took his first step toward the unknown. Chapter 3. Footprints in the mist. The mist thickened as Elias pressed forward, the trees standing like sentinels in the gloom. The footprints led deeper into the forest, each one pressed firm into the damp earth, spaced wide apart, a stride longer than any living creature should have. His breath came shallow, his fingers tightening around the strap of his bag. Every logical part of his mind whispered for caution, but the part of him that had spent his life chasing the past knew he couldn't stop now. He followed the trail, The forest was ancient, untouched by time, untouched by men. The trees were massive, their bark rough with centuries of growth. Vines draped over their limbs like forgotten relics. The ground was damp, the scent of moss and earth filling his lungs. Another footprint, then another. Elias stopped and crouched beside one of the tracks. He brushed a hand over its edges, feeling the weight of the impression. It wasn't just large, it was impossibly fresh. The soil was still settling, tiny rivulets of moisture sliding down its ridges. A gust of wind stirred the fog, and for a moment he thought he saw movement ahead. A shifting silhouette, something too large, too fluid in its motion to be a trick of the mist. His pulse hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just a fossil record waiting to be unearthed. Something was here. He straightened and pressed on. Each footprint led him deeper, pulling him towards something vast and unknown. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. No bird song, no rustling leaves, only his own breath and the steady thud of his boots against the earth. Then the forest opened up, a clearing. A hush fell over everything, as if the world itself had paused. In the clearing, the footprints became erratic, circling, overlapping. Elias scanned the area, his heart pounding. The ground had been disturbed, as if something massive had stood here for a long time before moving on. He turned in a slow circle, the mist swirling at the edges of his vision. The silence pressed against him, thick and watchful. He knew, without knowing how, that he was being observed. Then came the sound. Low, a deep vibration in the air. Not a growl, not a roar. Something older, more measured. A presence. The mist shifted again, and for a fraction of a second, Elias glimpsed something impossible. A shadow moving through the fog, golden eyes gleaming through the haze. It was watching him, not as prey, not as a predator, as something else. Elias swallowed hard. His pulse roared in his ears, but he didn't run. He couldn't, because he knew, without a doubt, that the past wasn't just buried beneath the earth. It was alive.